What would have to happen in a country for 45 million people to stop speaking the language of their parents? 100 years ago, the German language was everywhere in America. Newspapers, schools, churches. But in the early 20th century, speaking German in the United States suddenly became dangerous. And across the country, a real hunt for anything German began. But the strangest part of this story is that Germans were never a small immigrant group in America. For a long time, German culture was one of the most visible cultures in the country. By the late 19th century, around 800 newspapers were printed in German across the United States. At the time, they made up about 80% of all foreign language newspapers in the country. Entire communities read the news, debated politics, and followed world events in the language of their parents. By 1910, about 9 million people in the United States spoke German as their native language. In a country of roughly 90 million people, that meant about 1 in every 10 Americans spoke German. In some towns, it was possible to walk through the streets and hear German almost as often as English. For a moment in American history, it even seemed possible that German might remain one of the major languages of the country, which makes what happened next even more surprising. In the middle of the 19th century, something dramatic began to happen across Europe. In 1848, revolutions erupted across many of the German states. People demanded political freedoms, constitutions, and a united German nation. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the old political order might finally change. But the revolutions failed. And when they failed, thousands of activists, teachers, writers, and reformers suddenly faced a difficult choice: stay and risk repression, or leave and start again somewhere else. Many of them chose America. These migrants later became known as the 48ers. And when they arrived in the United States, they brought with them new ideas, new newspapers, and new communities. In many ways, they would help shape what later became known as German America. By the late 19th century, German communities in America were growing rapidly. In cities across the country, German culture became part of everyday life. There were German clubs, singing societies, and cultural associations. Beer gardens filled with music and conversation became popular gathering places. German festivals brought together thousands of people. In cities like Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, entire neighborhoods spoke German in their daily lives. For many immigrants, these communities felt almost like a small piece of home inside America. German America was no longer just a group of immigrants. It had become a powerful and visible part of the country. And for a time, it seemed as if it would remain that way. But in the early 20th century, the atmosphere in the United States began to change. Not slowly, suddenly. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Germany was no longer just a distant homeland for immigrants. It had become the enemy. Across the country, suspicion toward anything German began to spread. German newspapers closed. Schools removed the language from their classrooms. Families stopped speaking German in public. But in some places, the hostility went even further. In 1918, a German immigrant named Robert Prager was accused of being disloyal to the United States. A crowd took him from his home, forced him to march through the streets, and that night, he was lynched. It was one of the most shocking moments of the anti-German hysteria that swept across America during the war. And after that, many German-American families began to make a quiet decision. They would stop speaking German. And the pressure did not stop there. Across the United States, anything associated with Germany suddenly became suspicious. German newspapers closed. Schools removed the language from their classrooms. In some states, Teaching German to young children was even banned. In a country where millions of people had grown up speaking the language, that change was sudden and dramatic. But in some places, the hostility went even further. There were cases where people were attacked simply for speaking German in public. Communities began removing German words from street signs. Businesses quietly erased German names from their storefronts. Even everyday food was renamed. Sauerkraut became Liberty cabbage. German measles became Liberty measles. And for many families, the safest decision became silence. Parents stopped teaching their children German. Some families even changed their last names. Miller became Miller. Schmidt became Smith. And within a single generation, something remarkable began to disappear. Today, tens of millions of Americans still have German ancestry. In fact, it remains the largest ancestry group in the United States. But for many families, that connection now exists quietly in the background of their history. Sometimes it appears only in a last name. Sometimes in an old family recipe. Sometimes in a story passed down through generations. And sometimes it disappears so completely that people no longer realize it was ever there. History doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it simply becomes invisible. Thank you for watching this video. If this story made you curious about your own family history, consider subscribing to the channel and tell us in the comments. Do you know where your family comes from? Do you know the story behind your last name? We read every comment, and your stories truly matter to us. Your experiences help make these histories richer and more complete.